Welcome to this edition of Thought to Action, a new installment of our Red Alert China series, presented by the Herb London Center for Policy Research. I'm Chris Cordani, hosting today. In our Red Alert China series, we focus on issues pertaining to the China threat. If you enjoy our content, don't forget to hit that like button. Also, comment, share, and subscribe. To enjoy sneak previews of our videos, exclusive content, and more special programming in the works, join our Patreon page, patreon.com/thoughttoaction. As a subscriber, you'll also have access to our Ask Us Anything sessions, where we at the London Center answer your questions. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Getter, and our website, londoncenter.org. Our panel today consists of London Center for Policy Research Senior Fellow Jay Homnick, London Center for Policy Research Senior Fellow and author of The Coming Collapse of China, Gordon Chang. Follow Gordon on Twitter at gordongchang.com, and London Center for Policy Research Distinguished Fellow Navy Captain Pete O'Brien. As we speak, it's that time again, the Winter Olympics. This time, though, it's taking place in Beijing. Aside from the low U.S. ratings and the heralded athletic competition, there are a host of underlying issues surrounding these games and China's involvement in world politics. The Genocide Olympics. There was a lot of boycott talk about them before the festivities in China, but not much really happened. The Biden-Trudeau so-called diplomatic boycott has proved to be purely symbolic, if anything, as the countries are participating overall. Still, how effective would a boycott of the Beijing 2022 Olympics have been anyway, as weighed against thinking about our own athletes who worked hard to get to the games? Gordon, I want to start with you.
The most important thing here is that China is committing genocide. It's committing crimes against humanity and other atrocities. And these crimes are comparable to what the Third Reich was committing prior to the mass exterminations of 1941. So whatever the effect of a boycott would be, we shouldn't be there. It's just a moral issue. In addition to that, of course, we have a treaty obligation. The Genocide Convention of 1948 requires us to prevent and punish acts of genocide, and we're doing neither. So regardless of effectiveness, and we can argue about the importance of symbolism to Beijing, we shouldn't be there.
Yeah, I would add that there's no question that China would be much more affected by a boycott than even Germany would have been in the 1930s. It's just in the nature of the beast. They're very concerned about the image. And now this cuts both ways. This is a reason not to boycott as well as a reason to boycott. In other words, it's a more powerful weapon when employed against China, and as such has to be weighed and measured whether or not the issues rise to the level of doing it. So I'm not making a comment saying we should or should not do it. I'm just saying it has a great deal of weight in relation to China. And what I would add is that if we do think that as things are proceeding along, we're likely to end up in some kind of military conflict with China within a few years, this might have been a better place to have the conflict without blood.
I completely agree with my two compatriots here. I would add, it's worthwhile taking a look at what Germany did in the 1936 Olympics. They made the modern Olympics. Leni Riefenstahl, the movie director, and Joseph Goebbels, the Ministry of Information, essentially the senior PAO man for Hitler, turned what was a grand sporting event into a national display of the wonders and glories of the Nazi regime. And countries have followed that lead more or less since then. And by giving China the Olympics twice in a decade, we play into that opportunity for them to strut about on the world stage. And it's ridiculous. And what we should have done is, as soon as someone said that the Olympics were going to Beijing in 2022, the United States should have said, we boycott. We're not going. We're not doing that. There's a long-term solution as to, I'll just throw out, is move the Summer Olympics to Greece permanently, move the Winter Olympics to Oslo permanently, and let's stop this nonsense.
It would save a lot of money. For America's for America's part, gentlemen, the ratings are very clear. We've shown quite an apathy toward the games this year. I barely even know who's participating. I didn't see a lot of hullabaloo even as we usually see, but maybe it's just us not paying attention, or maybe we just don't feel like watching them in China. I don't know. I can't delve into the minds of every American. But how and why did the IOC even allow China to have and keep the games, considering its history of human rights abuses, financial manipulation, and threats toward Taiwan and citizens of Hong Kong? Not to mention what's going on with the Uyghurs.
Well, we've got to remember there were only two cities that bid for these games. There was Almaty in Kazakhstan and Beijing. The IOC, International Olympic Committee's requirements were so onerous that all European cities just dropped out. And so I sort of like Pete's idea of just going to Oslo. But clearly Beijing was not an appropriate choice. And one of the things that's occurring now is we're seeing the Chinese are not able to handle an Olympics with their extremely strict COVID protocols, stricter than the IOC wanted. We have a substantial number of foreign athletes who have now been put into these quarantine hotels, which is a polite term for cages. Those rooms are so small that athletes can't actually keep themselves in shape. The food is grossly insufficient in quantity, and in quality, it is horrible. Really, what we're seeing is China try to use these COVID rules to disadvantage foreign countries, because we haven't seen any Chinese athlete being put into a quarantine facility. So this is just really disgusting. And I think one of the things, it's absolutely right that China was going to try to use this for glorifying its communist system. But what they're ending up doing, because of a number of things, is blackening their reputation on the world stage. And so this just shows that communism and Chinese communism is just not compatible with the international system.
There's no question about it. And it's fascinating to consider the idea that the athletes will come home and go, let's go to a good Chinese restaurant. Because we're providing better Chinese food than China. That's not a good look.
Yeah, I just completely agree with what both these gentlemen say, is that this is just a ridiculous situation, and I'll go back to it. We should have boycotted it, whatever it was, 5 years ago when they announced it was going to be in Beijing.
Well, it's interesting to consider that we may end up doing better by not boycotting. If it turns into such a black eye for China that we would add our fingerprints on it, it might be a kind of a nice victory.
Well, the Chinese are doing this to themselves. So, for instance, India originally announced that it would send its diplomats to the opening and closing ceremonies. But because the Chinese chose a colonel, Colonel Chi Faobao, as one of the torchbearers, this was the guy who led the surprise attack that killed 20 Indian soldiers on the night of June 15th, 2020 in Ladakh in the Himalayas. Because China chose Xi as a torchbearer, India said, look, we're boycotting the games diplomatically. So China really is wounding itself. And really what it's done, I think, is through various means, it's highlighted the aspects of the Olympics, or the aspects of communism that people just abhor about China. So this is Beijing just showing the world just how awful it is.
Well, one of the things that happens if you're sitting and making TV for internal consumption for a long time, you get out of the habit of making good TV for external consumption.
Joining us now on the panel is London Center for Policy Research President Tony Shafer. Welcome to Red Alert China. And let's throw this one at you. Of course, China would love to showcase its country and athletes, and I'm pretty sure that's what they're doing. I remember a certain dictator wanted to do that back in 1936, and there were some failures there too. Still, we've read about participants not being fed well enough and complaints of poor accommodations. You mentioned the COVID situation too. What does China hope to actually accomplish with this, and amid all this and the pandemic-related failures?
So, thank you for having me. I'm sorry about being late. I had to attend a reading of a will. I got nothing. That's a line from Spies Like that's a line from Spies Like Us. Sorry.
Excellent.
Anyway, back to serious notes. I think there's two things, and I always defer to Gordon on this, but I think there's two things that are apparent from the way the Chinese PRC is playing this. First is arrogance. They are being disrespectful to the athletes coming in from other nations because they want to make the point that they can do whatever they want based on the fact that they will dictate to the world what they believe is important. I think it's something that they've created for themselves, relating to this image that we are the big dog now. And secondly, just from the perspective of tactics, gee, I would make, if you want to really win, how better to do it than making the lives of the competitors miserable, putting them in facilities and giving them food that's just not adequate. It does create a psychological effect on these folks to, I think, degrade their ability to compete. So it's a combination of, I think, those two things which have allowed for the Chinese to just decide they're going to do it. I don't think they care about what the rest of the world thinks of them. The fact that people showed up and are giving them the respect of allowing them to host the Olympics and having their athletes show up, it's just, thank you for showing up. And now we're going to just basically give you the finger any way we can to make sure you understand that you are an inferior race. And Gordon, I've heard you talk about the Han, the idea that they are the superior race. I think it has a lot to do with that. I think a lot of this goes back to 1936, where Hitler believed the Aryans were the chosen race. I think there's a great deal of racial overtones now by the current Chinese. I don't know if that's radical to say or not, but everything I've seen from listening to Gordon and other things I've studied regarding China over the past few years indicates to me that the nationalism, what's driving their nationalism, is almost this idea that they are a chosen people. So I don't know, Gordon, am I in trouble by saying all this, or?
No, you're absolutely right about that, Tony, because they had a Uyghur cross-country skier being one of the two athletes to light the cauldron. And the message there was that, look, we commit crimes against humanity. We're flaunting it. And
That's right.
We don't care what you think.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
And no, you're absolutely right when you said, look, China is saying, we're top dog, you must be obedient to us. You are going to bow down. This really goes back throughout Chinese history as emperors tried to do this. Xi Jinping is trying to do this right now because he believes that, for instance, China is the world's only sovereign state. And so we've got to be concerned about the messages that he is sending through these Olympics.
Well, let me just finish a point that Gordon made. So we did years ago for Boeing, I guess I can talk about this, for Boeing Phantom Works, a deep dive into China. Basically, we worked, we basically took several of folks who spoke native Chinese, I think it was Mandarin, and they had spent time in China. So we did what we called the inside out analysis of China. Basically, we wanted to become China for purposes of this exercise, so that we could avoid confirmation bias, which is a huge issue for a lot of corporations and governments. The idea that, these are all the things we want to believe, and you project that into your assessment. We did this thing called the inside out assessment and actually briefed it all the way up to Boeing leadership. And the two conclusions that were most significant, first off, was the Chinese believe that their law is older than our law. Therefore, why should we pay attention to the West? We're an older society. Therefore, why do we have to listen to you? And secondly, because they have been emboldened by us, by the West, it's like, hey, you're kind of already fueling what we believe to be our destiny. We can do what we want. So it was these two things which seemed to be a very big factor in trying to understand where China was going. And this is 10 years ago. So, again, our judgment was they were more nationalistic than communistic, and the nationalism was based on the fact that they believed that their law is older than our law. Why should we pay attention to you? So, just saying.
Well, I would make this point, and I'd be interested to hear what Gordon has to say, because we know the figures in the government that are involved in arranging the games. So it'll be very interesting to see, after the games are over, do those people get promotions or do they get demotions? And that'll give you an idea whether China's happy with the results. Wouldn't you say that's correct, Gordon?
Yeah, absolutely. Remember, Xi Jinping was the Communist Party official who was in charge of the 2008 Summer Olympics. That was generally considered to be a success across the board. And he became General Secretary of the Communist Party in November 2012. Xi Jinping right now has a lot riding on these games because he, again, has made the games his personal bailiwick. He's gone out to the Olympic sites to inspect them, acting like a construction manager, giving directions. So if these games don't go well, I think that his political enemies in Beijing are going to use that against him. And I think that he knows that as well. So Chinese propaganda is going to try to portray the games as a success, whether or not they actually are, because it really means all the world to Xi Jinping, whether he gets his third term as General Secretary of the Communist Party or not.
It's also important to remember that in 12 months, the world is going to forget a whole bunch of the details about the Olympics. They're only going to remember really that the Olympics were held. We think they were held in China, and they're going to be a medal count, and a lot of the details are going to disappear in the fog of history, and that suits China fine. So I go back to the issue of we all should have boycotted right away, said we're not going, and minimalized this entire Olympics. It's sort of too late now. It doesn't matter whether we have lousy press coverage or not in the West. The fact of the matter is that in 6 months, the Olympics will be something in the past, and China will be able to pat itself on the back that they held the Winter Olympics.
That's quite possible. I do have another question, though. This concerns the American side. You do realize that every home country gets to put their hockey team into the tournament, okay? Regardless of how good or how bad they are. There are a good number of American players on China's men's hockey team. Gentlemen, considering the tensions between our nations, what are your thoughts on this? Should they have just said, no, I don't want to be here? Keep in mind, they do play for a Chinese team in the Continental Hockey League as well. But what are your thoughts on Americans participating for China in the Olympics?
They're traitors. I mean, it's just as simple as that. I mean, I don't think that anything more to say.
I'll second that.
I do too. Go ahead, Jay.
I just don't know how sophisticated these athletes are, and whether they've been fully advised to understand the ramifications of what they're doing. They're just looking to play.
I don't know. I think we figured out in 1980 what the Olympics was all about regarding the Soviet Union. So I think they're smart enough to figure it out. This is a political point I think that needs to be made. There are immense benefits that these athletes had coming up through the United States system of governance. They have freedoms. The ideas that they have are not considered dangerous, at least I don't think so, relating to the foundation of our constitutional republic. The idea that you would go and support a nation which essentially promotes genocide, promotes use of prison labor, promotes the idea that the citizens can only think to a certain level and then be essentially discredited, the social credit score. I don't know how anybody rational can support any nation that has a social credit score that determines what resources you're permitted to get. If you don't understand that, and you're an athlete, and you're going to a competition at a global level, then there's something wrong. And I don't believe for a minute these athletes are that badly informed that they didn't understand what they were doing.
Well, Tony, as the author of spy novels, you're aware that you encounter this in those espionage situations all the time, but people have national allegiances that are not political. They're national, and then there's people who have a political understanding, and sometimes they have the strength to overlay the political understanding over the national allegiances. But a lot of the drama in spy novels has to do with that. Your family's in a certain place, your roots are there, you recognize the hills, and you have a linkage, to your heart that's linked with your homeland. while at the same time you come to recognition that there's political systems that are have greater equity and that are more humanitarian elsewhere. There's a great human conflict that resides in that. That's what makes a traitor. You're right. At some point,
but yeah, I mean the issue of someone who was born of an American parent and an immigrant, born in the United States, grows up in the United States, goes to American high school, learns how to skate in the United States, trains in the United States, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and has been accepted into Stanford. That's pretty American to me.
Yeah.
And to then stand up and say, yeah, but I'm Chinese, there's something goofy there. And yes, there are all sorts of athletes around the world who train in the United States, but they remain whatever they are. They remain Brazilian and Argentinian and Kenyan and Nigerian and Japanese. And yeah, great. They're here in the United States because the training facilities are great. There's all sorts of opportunities, but they recognize they came here as a Japanese skater and they skate here and then they go, but they compete for Japan.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. It's the reverse situation that is the issue, is that going through all this and then saying, yeah, but I've got an opportunity to run for the whoever because I didn't make the American team. Come on, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, if we take Eileen Gu, for instance, who won gold in the big air competition for women, she's the best in the world. She's the best in the world if she competes for America, if she competes for China.
Right.
She made a choice. And when she was in China during these Olympics, she has made comments supporting the Communist Party. We have to establish or reestablish the notion of personal responsibility. This goes back to the Nuremberg trial. Everyone has responsibility. And, the only thing I can say about Eileen Gu, I suppose, is that, she made these comments about internet freedom, and her comment, which was posted on Weibo, which is the Chinese version of Twitter, was then censored within a few minutes. So I guess there's karma in the world, but the point is that this is traitorous.
And to Gordon's point, I don't know how any flavor of U.S. political party can be okay with genocide, with the blatant use of prison labor, with the complete dehumanization of a population. I don't know how anybody can be okay with that, either a liberal, a progressive, a libertarian, or conservative. I don't know how anybody based on our principles can be okay with that. And that's why, back to Pete's point, I can't believe we showed up for this thing. It's insane.
I would just make this point that we have to do a better job, not only at Olympic time, but we have to, and of course, no one's doing a better job than Gordon, but we need more voices like Gordon out there. We have to do a better job of making sure that people are aware of the Chinese human rights record as it goes on. We have to call out atrocities as they occur, and not only for a small group of politically minded people who read political magazines. That's not going to sway a nation. The man in the street has to know that China is a place of daily atrocities. I don't think that people do know that.
I'd add organ harvesting to your list. It's just an astounding concept that I think the average American would be shocked if they could actually have it explained to them.
One of the things that Gordon's been great on, and I appreciate, is being committed to the truth, to the objective truth. And I've given a lot of thought about this. Matter of fact, I just met with someone where we talked about this. Some of you may remember I was on the transition team, the Trump transition team, back in 2016. One of the guys I worked with during a time is a guy named Mark Milley. During my first, and I've known Mark for a while, we've had our differences public several times, Bergdahl and some other things. So we've had a running battle at times in the media. So it's no big surprise. But what surprised me is during my meeting, we had about an hour meeting in December of 16. Milley laid out to me in about a 20-minute dissertation his understanding of China. He told me he had read all the documents, he had talked to the generals, and he recognized that they were a threat. What surprised me about Milley, and speaking as he is our current chairman of the Joint Chiefs, is I didn't recognize at that time when he told me all of this that he was almost painting a picture that it's too late to do anything to resist. It's just they've done all this and they're going. It was more like I believed at the time it was a warning saying they wanted to actually dominate the Pacific Rim. I think Milley was just saying they're going to, and there's nothing we can do about it because that's the actions he's taken. He's deferred repeatedly to the Chinese, to the military. And I think this is emblematic of the current set of leaders we have in place. They're not willing to do anything to stop what they know is occurring. That cannot be continued. And I don't understand how they don't understand that their deference, constant deference to the Chinese, the People's Republic of China, not the Republic of China in Taiwan, their constant deferring to these folks will only result in what we saw in Europe in the late 1930s, a conflagration. I hate that word, but that's what's inevitable if we don't get leaders in place who can wake up to this. And that's something that I know everybody on this discussion is committed to. We have to reframe the leadership that we have in place to confront China, not accept the Chinese objectives as inevitable. So just that's something I think I'd like to have everybody take away from this.
And we need to remind our viewers of something we made in several earlier broadcasts, which is that Ukraine and Taiwan are very much linked. And if we let the Russians take Ukraine, it's going to be very hard for China to pass up the opportunity to go for Taiwan.
No doubt.
I would just wish that General Milley would remember Winston Churchill. The defeatism in American society, and especially among the elites, is alarming. On the general point about where we are, China wants to overthrow our government. It is willing to use the most malicious tactics imaginable. It's killing Americans. It deliberately spread coronavirus beyond its borders. That's 906,000 Americans. China is not just attacking America, it is attacking the whole notion of civilization. So this is where we make our stand. We have no place else to go.
Thank you all for being with us for this special Red Alert China 2022 Winter Olympics edition of Thought to Action, presented by the Herb London Center for Policy Research. Please remember to hit that like button. Feel free to comment on our discussion. We appreciate your thoughts, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to our Thought to Action channel and pound that big red bell for updates on future shows. Find out more about the London Center on our website, londoncenter.org. And if you'd like to help us out and help us continue create discussions and programming like this, please join us on Patreon, patreon.com/thought-to-action, where you can enjoy sneak previews, special exclusive content, and our Ask Us Anything sessions, which can be rather fun and rambunctious. Also, you can help us greatly by sharing this video with your friends, your colleagues, and your social networks. For our panel at the Herb London Center for Policy Research, I'm Chris Cordani. Thank you, stay informed, and make your day a great one.